Hello, everybody, and welcome to Book Passage. We're virtual, but we have great guests today. It's another completely intriguing Book Passage event. I'm your host, Paula Farmer. Thank you for taking away time from work Zoom to join our Zoom, which I promise will be infinitely more interesting as we have some very intriguing nonfiction books featured today. And we'll be delving into topics not often explored and be presented by their authors who offer a unique but very necessary perspective. Starting with one that I find to be kind of a combination of honest, funny, and visceral. White Space is a powerful collection that follows Jennifer De Leon as she comes of age as a Guatemalan-American woman and learns to navigate the space between two worlds. Prior to this book, she authored Don't Ask Me Where I'm From and was the editor of Wise Latinx, Writers on Higher Education. Jennifer has published prose in over a dozen literary journals, and she is assistant professor of creative writing at Framingham State University and makes her home in the Boston area, where I was just visiting. A little hot and toasty there these days. Daisy Hernandez, her in conversation partner, hello there, Daisy, believed that her aunt had become deathly ill from eating an apple when she was younger. In her 30s, though, she only knew that her aunt had died of Chagas, and you'll tell me if I'm pronouncing that right. It's a rare and devastating illness. And she did some research, as she got older and discovered that this disease, which is often called the kissing bug disease, is more prevalent in the United States than Zika virus. She learned that in the United States, more than 300,000 people in the Latinx community have Chagas, or the kissing bug disease. Though it's unsparing, it's gripping, it's nuanced, but she interviews a lot of people, and it ends up having a great intersection of politics, infectious disease issue, public health policies, and racism. And Daisy Hernandez is a former reporter for the New York Times and has been writing about the intersection of race, immigration, class, and sexuality for almost 2 decades, believe it or not. She co-edited Colonize This, Young Women of Color on Today's Feminism, and she is author of the award-winning memoir, A Cup of Water. Ever since I interviewed Daisy for Women's History Month a few months ago on an Instagram series, I've been so excited to have her here at Book Passage. And now I'm doubly excited because of who she's partnered with. And I think it's a great pairing. We're in for a treat. Ladies, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Paula, and thank you, Book Passage, for having us. Hi, Jen.
I'm so excited.
I'm very excited too. And thank you, everyone out there who's joining us. So it is just such a treat to talk with you about your book. So I would love to start by hearing the origin story of this book. I was really excited because I've actually been, as I think I've mentioned to you, I've actually been teaching some of the essays that are in this book. So I was really excited to see this debut collection from you and to see how you brought it together. And I think Paula summed it up really well around the sort of Guatemalan coming of age. But I would love to hear from your perspective how this book got started. Where was its beginnings?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, Book Passage and Paula and Daisy for being in conversation with me. It's wonderful for both of us to, I feel like we're at a table, we're just pulling up our chairs with our cafe and talking, and then other people are here too, sort of. Yes, you are. Basically, White Space is a book that I was writing not knowing that it was a book. I was writing the essays over the last 10 years, one at a time. I would sometimes put a couple of essays on the back burner. I'd put them in a drawer. I would just let them simmer. Others, came out immediately. And then others, it was painful to kind of cobble together islands of paragraphs and form them. But what what inspired me to create this collection is that I realized I had several essays about my trip to Guatemala when I was 28 years old, when I quit my job, sublet my apartment, dipped into my savings, much to my parents' horror, and moved to Guatemala, and it's where both my parents were born and grew up. And so I'd been there before, but never alone, and never, I always was there visiting. I never felt like I was living there. And so the book is really about the white spaces that I've been a part of my whole life, growing up in the suburbs of Boston. And then it's also about the white space of the page and how I learned to really take up space and claim space as a writer. And those themes and threads kind of all came together when I realized, oh my goodness, maybe I have a collection, but it's scary because I, again, I didn't set out to do this. I didn't really know. I started entering contests, asking friends to read the whole manuscript. And I took much inspiration from you, from your work, and from so many other women writers of color. And I felt such a drive, such a push to do this, especially in the recent years where I just felt like there's no time. We can't wait anymore. So that is how White Space kind of came to fruition. But I'm dying to hear your origin story of the kissing bug, because it also, I believe, took several years, and like other amazing projects, doesn't fall from the sky.
Mhm.
So I'm like dying for you to peel the onion and tell us how this came into the world.
It's so true. I feel like it's so important for people out there to know that this does not happen overnight. And sometimes I love what you said about sometimes not even knowing that you're working on a book project, like, but pieces of it are coming together and coming out. And I really related. Actually, I have a passage in my book too about what you said about making that trip to Guatemala on your own terms as an adult, and how different that is from when we go with our parents. So for researching for my book, I also did the same thing, went to Colombia. My mother's from Colombia, my father's from Cuba. And for this book, I went to Colombia by myself to do interviews and to learn more and to interview experts. And I remember getting on that I write about it in the book, getting on that airplane and feeling like I'm missing something, almost like, oh my God, did I forget my wallet? What's different this time? And just realizing that's the first time that I am on a plane to South America without mommy and tias and sister, the whole tribe of women with me. And it felt so, almost like ungrounding and like almost a rite of passage too. I've talked to other Latinas who talk about that, like that first trip back to wherever in Latin America as by yourself, as being this sort of like, I don't know, rite of passage, or this sort of like very monumental experience. And I just love that many of us are documenting it, the sort of migration back.
Yep.
And the kissing bug, it actually began when I was writing a short story. And this disease that I had known my entire life, but I didn't know much about it. I just I knew that it's what my auntie had been diagnosed with, and she was like, we had a complicated mother-daughter relationship, I think is the best way to say it. But she had been diagnosed with this disease, and it had been a part of our family life. It had ended up killing her, and yet I knew so little about it, which I only realized once I was writing this fictional story and was realizing, I actually don't know very much. And so I started researching, and I just, everything that I kept finding was really surprising to me, because I thought it was very, very rare. And then to find out that there's 300,000 people in the United States with it's formally called Chagas disease, or the kissing bug disease. It was just so shocking to find out that there were that many people in the United States. And then, around 6 million, mostly in Latin America and South America, Central America, and Mexico. And so to think there's like millions of people with this parasitic disease, where I thought it was incredibly, it was just my auntie, was such a shock to me. And I became so curious, like, who are these other families, especially in the United States? I was really curious to know if they were similar to my family, if they had struggled with the medical care system, because, the parasite can be very deadly, and 1 in 3 people go on to develop, serious cardiac complications or gastrointestinal disorders because of this parasite. It can end up killing people, as it did with my auntie. So I really wanted to find out who these families were. And then, it's you probably know this feeling with your books as well, where I thought it might be one essay or one article, but I kept meeting, first of all, I kept meeting incredible Latinx families who were willing to share their stories with me. And so I started to feel like it can't just be one essay or one article. And then the more that I learned about how, just how neglected this disease has been, and can be and has been, because it disproportionately affects the Latinx community in the US. It just felt like there was so much more to say. Then I found out that Charles Darwin might have had this disease.
Right. Yeah.
So it just kept growing and, grew legs
Yeah.
and so
No,
forth.
I love that part, just learning about how Darwin was possibly, right, hypothetically affected by the disease. And I learned so much in here. And I just am so impressed and in awe of how you wove together science, like capital S science, right, with memoir.
Right.
It's so intimidating to me to write narrative nonfiction in that sense, where you're weaving in some research. I tend to kind of play in the personal essay arena part of the landscape, and it's just so inspiring to see how you maintain that personal story, but we're able to also pull the curtain back and open up for the reader this greater understanding of this disease, but still through story. Because it's funny, because when I found your book recently, of course I read it and heard about it and loved it, but then I was like, I need a physical copy, right? So I went to the bookstore and it was in the section of medicine. And I just thought, yes, I thought, wow, to me, it's just so neat. It's so cool. I mean, that's a whole other discussion, right? How we figure out where books go and live in the bookstore. But I just felt like, I don't know, I was happy that it was there. And I was happy that it was part of a narrative that traditionally leaves out the Latinx community, and that doesn't, there's not so much, up until this point anyway, there aren't so many books that have, like we've been talking about, documentation about these experiences and these realities. And it makes me want to ask you, just why and how you decided to weave together these elements of family. I mean, it's your Theodora, which is so funny because that's my mother's name, Dora, and we have like a million similarities. Once Daisy and I have known each other for years, and it's just incredible how many parallels. We both interned at Ms. Magazine and started writing columns. Those are like our first publications, right? And we've been part of the amazing Macondo Foundation and met at the Vona community reading in the Bay Area. I mean, there's so many stories, AWP, and of course you have the essay in Wise Latinas, a beautiful essay. So there's so many parallels and common denominators here, but I just want to know how did you do this? Like, how did you take the science and the memoir and kind of marry them together in this book?
Yeah, I actually was not expecting to have memoir. Initially, I actually really envisioned the book as the stories of other families. And I had thought that maybe I would have a paragraph about me and my auntie at the beginning. And for those who have not read the book, my auntie is very much a part of this book. She's a very big presence. But I thank my editor at Tin House, Macy Cochran, who really invited me to bring in the memoir. And I really feel like also, and was so supportive of the journalism vision that I had, that I very much wanted to tell the stories of other patients and very much wanted to go into that medical and science history. But I really struggled to marry them together. I actually wrote an essay for Lit Hub around books that inspired me to bring memoir, and because it was memoir and reportage, actually interviewing families, and then also like research and interviews with scientists. So there were a couple sort of different aspects of nonfiction that I was bringing together. But I realized that when my editor invited me to bring in the memoir in a more significant way, it really, as I worked with that, it really became clear that the memoir could really serve as the spine for the whole book, that it would be like, what the book really rested on and what gave it shape and form. And that voice could be the voice that was consistent, whether I was talking about my childhood or whether I was talking about DNA of parasites, that would be, that's what I was hopeful, but like for the reader, because I feel like there is so much material, like, and I only put a little bit of the material that I found, right? So I felt like I was really thinking a lot about like what would help the reader stay with the story and still be able to make sense of the science and the medicine. And so that memoir voice seemed really critical. And it's also a voice that I'm really comfortable in, which I assume you feel the same way, because it seems so, just because your writing is so beautiful. So I assume that you feel, at ease in that too. And I was curious because you made a decision to, not only talk about your trip in Guatemala and your time there, but also to narrate some of that history, right? And this civil war that spanned more than 3 decades. And I really noticed that you made this decision to like, give the voice to others, right? To the people that you met. And I'm thinking of, I wrote it down. I wanted to, Cesar was one. And, oh my gosh, who was the other person? Amaro was the other one. You kind of like, and I noticed this really, I don't know. So I wondered if you could talk about that sort of like, it felt like you were kind of handing the mic to them and allowing them to narrate those, but it seemed so seamless. It was so seamless from your own narrative to like, okay, these are the people who lived through the war, who survived, who, in some cases were guerrilleros themselves as well. And I felt, I don't know, maybe you could talk about that too, because I felt like a sort of sense of this story belongs to them. And you were framing, but you were giving it to them to tell. So I was curious about how you made those decisions as a writer. Totally selfish question for me.
No, I know. I love this conversation. I mean, I don't know who said this or where I heard this quote, and I could be butchering it, but it's something like, think less about writing books as like writing about people versus writing for people. And I was thinking about that with this book. Like, I didn't want it to be something where I am trekking down to Guatemala and I'm like scooping up the stories and writing about them and coming back to the US. I wanted it really to be for Guatemalan people, specifically Guatemalan-American people. Like, this is a book that I wish I had had growing up, where I could get a window into learning more about the country, that in a way that wasn't like in Encyclopedia Britannica. I mean, there were so few books about Guatemala. I mean, really, like, I could count on my hand how many books I probably touched that had anything to do remotely with Central America. The history was completely omitted from my world history class, and never mind US history, even though we know the United States played such a huge role, like understatement, right, in the Civil War in Central America and specifically Guatemala. The CIA like supplying arms to the army in Guatemala and really propelling the genocide of 200,000 campesinos and indigenous peoples in Guatemala. And so I didn't know any of that. And this book, I feel like would have been incomplete if I were to only write about my food poisoning in Guatemala, or how I, polished some of my Spanish, or attempted to anyway, and that kind of writing. I felt like it would have been missing an organ, if it didn't have this this piece, this richer, deeper history. That said, I was intimidated just by the sheer number of dates and facts, and like you said, like there's only a piece of it in that makes it into the book, like the iceberg model, right? I'm like, oh, you don't even know how much there was to put in here. And what I ended up doing was taking my journals that I kept this little black notebook where I would just write down these fascinating to me, details and anecdotes and historical just tidbits. And I actually took those notebooks and put them into a Word document, and those become some of the interstitials in the middle section of the collection. And it's the kind of thing where like no one ever told me I could do that. And I'm so glad that I have this vehicle of creative nonfiction to be able to play with structure and form in that way. Because growing up, I thought essays had to be serious and, only with like hardcore facts that were like triple checked. And I think that there's so much more room in the creative nonfiction arena to play. So I'm glad that we're both doing that.
I totally want to ask you about the Guatemala notebooks because I really loved your decision to do that. And for me, it felt, and so for those who haven't read the book yet, yeah, there's these sort of like, they vary, right? Like sometimes I think the one that's in the campo is like, it's only a little paragraph. And then others have like, it really captures the feeling of like the nonfiction writer's notebook where there's like a quote that it clearly stands out. Sometimes there's, factual information or conjugation of verbs. And then sometimes it's like, what you want your mother to bring from the US when she comes to visit. So it felt to me like it was this moment where as a nonfiction writer, you pulled back the curtain. So like that we could see a little bit of your process, but I'm curious, like, if that's what you wanted to, those notebooks to do, or what kind, or what sort of work you wanted them to do in that section of the book.
Right. Yeah, of course, at the time I had no idea, and I'm glad I kept them. And then I'm glad I kept them in this form in the book. I guess I wanted those pieces to break up some of the longer essays, but also to just provide different angles of the material, different points of entry. Maybe someone reading the collection is reading it for the relationships or for the themes of immigration or education or coming of age. And then it's kind of like stuffing vitamins into the mashed potatoes. Like, you didn't know you were going to get this, but here's some information about the Civil War in Guatemala, just because I don't know that, a given reader would pick up a book about the history of Guatemala. But if I can in some way weave it in intentionally, but also in a way that propels the larger narrative and feeds the story, then great, and it might make a reader curious to then go learn more about the history of Guatemala. And then for Guatemalan-American readers, they can feel, wow, like maybe, our stories are in a book, they're on pages, hold this, and it's real, like it exists now. And of course it existed before, but there's something powerful in being able to have like the tangible object of the book.
Absolutely. I think both of our books are so much about documenting, right? And having a record that we didn't have growing up. Because I absolutely agree with you. When I read your book, I'm like, I wish I had this in high school. And I'm not from Guatemala, but I knew people from Guatemala, and so many of the stories I relate to with my own Latinx background as well. So I think so much of it is documenting and seeing on paper. And you wrote, part of what I love about your writing too, is that you address head-on issues of class and race. And I think you're going to read from the one about House City.
Yes. It's from the
Let's segue to that.
So this is from the essay Work, which is in the third section. So the book is divided like yours into 3 parts. And so the first part consists of essays before I left on this trip. And then the second part consists of essays about my time in Guatemala. And then finally, after I returned to Boston. So basically I cut my trip short for many reasons. And my apartment wasn't ready yet. So I had to live with my parents again. And at this point I had just turned 29. So you can imagine. And they have a small home. And I was living with them that summer. I was trying to write, and they had like 2 televisions on like all day long. And so I was presented with this opportunity to house sit for this famous author for a few days. And I thought, yes, I just like hit the jackpot. I need to get out of here and write. So I'll just read a section from that essay. I cut short my trip to Guatemala, which I'd taken to learn more about my family's history, to improve my Spanish, and to write. Instead, I had scribbled in journals, gotten bit by a dog, and gained 11 pounds. I came home without an idea for a novel, much less a draft. Upon my return to the States, I alternated my days between teaching adults English as a second language at the local college and answering phones at a tile company in Waltham, where my boss referred to most songs that came on the radio as fucking gay. So yes, this house sitting gig came at the perfect time. I was hoping that somehow, maybe miraculously, I could breathe the same air as this famous author and in 5 days, at last, begin the work of writing my novel. I pulled up to the famous author's house, or at least I thought it was his house. As I kept driving, I realized that the house was just the bike shed, mere punctuation to the grand estate. The driveway was at least half a mile long. I could smell the ocean in the distance and hear the gravel crunching underneath the tires. Finally, I parked in front of the blueberry bushes, checked my lip gloss in the rearview mirror. I wore a khaki skirt and a teal polo shirt. Did I look like a respectable house sitter? Preppy enough? Hello, the mister called from the front door. In my mind, he looked like a mister, like a senor. He had thick black hair, kind eyes, and a firm handshake. He smelled like a spa. A spunky ginger-haired dog barked at his heels. He lifted the dog and allowed her to kiss him on his nose, chin, and mouth. I clenched my toes. At this time in my life, I was still afraid of dogs. The mister led me to the screened-in porch overlooking the bay where we sat on tan couches and I pretended to love dogs. Biddy sat on my lap. I could feel her little heart beating. She licked my hand and I resisted the urge to jump. In the mornings, he said, Biddy likes if you scratch her butt, but by all means, do what you're comfortable with. And if she's looking a little chunky, give her half a turkey meatball. Otherwise, give her the whole one. Help yourself to any alcohol. Don't forget to let me show you how to use the bathtub. The bird you may hear in the morning has black fur on top of its head like a yarmulke, and it makes a sound like this, meow, meow. Should I have been taking notes? Help yourself to any food, please. And if you want to go for a bike ride, please do. There are maps and trails described in the binder I left on the table. He stood up suddenly. I followed him around his home. Cedar, that was the smell, and grew mute with envy and shock. The Mr. and Mrs. were good people. I could tell from the way he explained things, his concerned and caring instructions, and the way she smiled at me from her gray blue eyes as she walked down the stairway. He did all the talking while she packed snacks for the car. This is the GPS system to use if you want to go to the market. This is how the grill works. This is the outside shower with biodegradable toiletries. This is the pre-programmed remote control. It's exactly the same as the one upstairs. Are you good with technology? Do you have a Mac, a PC? Are you familiar with iTunes? Yes, of course. This is our music. Have you seen the Animal Planet DVDs? No? Oh, they're incredible. I have a job for you. Can you fill this hummingbird container with a quarter cup of sugar and fill it with water up until this line here? And you don't have to go crazy with it, but oh, you can open the windows like this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this. And this is not your life, but it could be. If you write one best-selling book, you too can have a dog and a cat that are like a son and daughter. And you can ask people to choose a pair of slippers to use when walking around your house. And you too can tell your house sitter that she can help herself to the ripe mango resting in the bamboo woven basket on top of the stainless steel countertop and say, we've eaten 5 this week and they're really delicious. Do you know how to cut a mango? Upon seeing that mango, I resisted the urge to burst into tears. I considered its birthplace and its siblings in other places, other countertops, other lands. I thought of the many kinds of mangoes that exist and how before my trip to Guatemala, I thought there was only one. That mango pulled me back to the many Guatemalan markets, to the Mercado de la Democracia in Quetzaltenango, where women sold everything from cinnamon sticks to shoelaces, from pineapples to live chickens, where over a few months I learned to distinguish the right mangoes by color and to barter in Spanish. And yes, famous American author, How to Cut a Mango.
Bravo. I have to clap. That was such a beautiful reading. I am so curious about your writing process with that particular essay because I love how you captured both the criticism and the humor as like that you were able to write this with humor. And so I'm curious, like, I don't know, how easily the writing come for that and, or what was the revision process like that so that you were balancing both, the kind of biting criticism that's evident, but I'm like laughing the whole way through as well, by sort of, the over the top
Right.
nature of this beast. Yeah.
I mean, I kept a journal. I wish I still did. I'm so impatient though. I could never read my own handwriting, and I've tried keeping a journal on my laptop. Dictation, it's just totally different, but I remember writing that scene or that passage in my journal when I was house sitting, and it was there on the page, and I think I wrote it, it kind of just poured out because I wasn't writing it for anyone but myself, and then when I realized that I'm writing an essay about my journey towards becoming a writer, but also work and the value of work. And I mean, I was house sitting and I was being paid to house sit. My father was cracking up like, only in America will somebody pay you to live in their house. And I was laughing with him because I understood after coming back from Guatemala, like, it is kind of absurd, right? Like, I will give you money to stay in my house. But anyway, I just kind of allowed myself to have fun with it. And I was inspired by Jamaica Kincaid's piece, Girl, where it's just one long sentence, a list of instructions. And I kind of had that in my ear when I was thinking about him giving me these instructions about, like, this is how you feed the bird. This is where the red onions are. This is where the liquor is. This is how, it just kind of had that kind of hypnotic feel, like, um, this is how I could be someone else. I don't know. But it was fun to write it. I don't know. Writing.
I love that Jamaica Kincaid was an influence, because absolutely. I mean, yes, her essay, The Girl, and then I'm also thinking of The Small Place, or This Small Place, the book length essay, because that also kind of has the same tone where you're cracking up, just the irony and the sort of, comedy, but also the biting criticism too, as well.
Yeah, I think humor can definitely be a part of the essay, the like formal essay,
Absolutely.
right? But when I was reading your book, I was thinking, so you open it with this quote by the Sherry Moraga, who we both had dinner with at AWP one year, remember?
Yes.
Yeah. And so you quote her, it's beautiful, this line: "There is a prayer in the act of writing." Sherry Moraga. And I love that. I feel like that's the sun's rays on your whole book. It made me think about how this book is a prayer, right? And then later on, you write, "To date, doctors cannot predict whose heart will be spared. Unless the infection is caught early, there is no cure." And something about just that fact of it, right? That it's so the way that you phrased it, unless the infection is caught early, there is no cure. There is no cure. It's not something that can be done unless it's caught early. And I just wondered what you think the role is of this story, of this book, in light of this reality, because I think it's doing such important things already, and it's been out just a couple of weeks, but I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely hoping that the book raises awareness about the disease, because it has been so institutionally neglected. And so I love that you brought up Sherry Moraga's quote, because I think she's been an inspiration to both of us as writers, and continues to be. And when I was reading one of her books and came across that line, it was while I was working on this book, and I just realized, oh my gosh, yes, I think I am in a state of like prayer of to bring attention to the disease, to like bring to light people's stories as well. It's been so neglected that the two medications that are available are the same ones that were invented back in the 1970s. There hasn't been anything new on the market. Hopefully that will change in coming years, but yeah, in the chronic stage, so after the first 2 months, sort of is the acute stage after the bite and the transmission of the parasite. But then after that, you're in a chronic stage. And if you're an adult, it's there isn't a cure. And if you're a child, and doctors don't know why, but children can be cured during their childhood, essentially. But that means getting them diagnosed and getting them treated, right? Which is quite a challenge, in South and Central America and Mexico, and even here in the United States, because we don't screen newborns for this disease, even though there's a congenital form of this disease, congenital Chagas. So the parasite can be like the Zika virus, transmitted from mother to child during pregnancy. And I ended up actually like digging into those numbers and figuring out, okay, how many babies do we have in the US that are born to moms from these regions of Latin America? And it's about 700,000 babies in the US born every year to moms who should be getting screened because they could get treated. And, a lot of times the babies are not showing any symptoms of the disease. So they're not, they're sort of like not setting off any alarms with doctors and pediatricians because they're not sick actually, but the parasite can be dormant in the body for 10 or 20 or 30 years even before you start having cardiac complications. So there's so many interventions that could happen. And I did feel, and I still do feel like, I know in my own life, so it's interesting Sherry Moraga is coming into this, but I remember reading her book, Loving in the War Years, when I was really young. And it felt like medicine to me, the way that stories and books can be medicine, it can heal us. So I think in a way, I do want my books to also be medicine, to heal something. I don't know if you feel that way about your writing, but.
No, I love that. Yeah. And it's like, so yeah, you belong in the medicine section of the bookstore. It goes back to that. But yeah, I mean, you're bringing what has been traditionally marginalized or, to the center, and in a big way. And I love that. I think that this is going to really make waves and hopefully get some legislation and get some more research done on the disease. And I was reading in the book that one of the pills or something is like one pill is like $750 or something.
Well, what ended up happening is that this guy called Martin Shkreli, who folks might remember as the pharma bro, that's how he was identified in media. He was also identified as the most hated man in America at one point. He's the guy who hiked the price on the HIV life-saving drug back in 2015. And so it was quite an uproar. And he ended up coming into this story because the medications were not FDA approved, so we didn't have access to them in the United States except by going through the CDC, and there's all these protocols in place. And so he decided to go after FDA approval for one of these medications. And, if you got them from the CDC by going, through these bureaucratic channels, it was free because it was part of these compassionate or research protocols. He wanted to get FDA approval. And what he told his investors is that he would price the regimen, a 2-month regimen, at $100,000, similar to some other drugs that were on the market for different diseases. And that was, that was quite the shock, especially to doctors and advocates, because you're talking about patients who are Latinx, who are immigrants, who are oftentimes in low-wage jobs without any health insurance. Many people don't even have access to Medicaid, or negotiating kind of their state Medicaid system. So to think of like pricing something at that high cost was really a shock to the system. And he did not end up getting FDA approval. A different company got it. And so the outcome has been actually very different than what that sort of nightmare scenario could have been for patients and for advocates and doctors.
Right. I can see how writing the book, you probably, maybe, I don't know, you let us know like how you had to think about which thread to pull and how far, because you could have written like so much about, gone deep dive into all these, because there's like stories within stories within stories. But speaking of that, I'd love to hear you read from the book.
Yes, I am happy to read. And I totally just have to say, I say this to my students actually is, you edit your work until you can't anymore. And then you have a wonderful editor step in and help. And so my editor definitely, I think, reined me in a lot of ways. And so, and also I had some wonderful readers as well. So yeah, it's like, right. We need the whole village to like tell us when to like stop, and quit. But I thought, I'm going to read about my auntie because it is just wild to me that that my auntie and your mother share the same name. It's, it's very surreal in some ways. And I did want to, because I think they're also, they're very different in certain ways. And then I think, I just want to talk about, I don't know, Latina mothers. they somehow have to be in the conversation. So we have to get them in. So I'll just read a little bit from this section. From Theodora's perspective, she did not demand very much of me. She simply wanted me to be like my sister, who did not argue with her. My sister Liliana agreed to everything over the years: the pigtails, the itchy school socks, the cereal bowl with too much milk. She knew how to go along to get along. And since we did not have other siblings and all our cousins were in Colombia or Cuba, my sister and I became a painful study in contrast for my auntie. To the same degree that my sister charmed her, I horrified Theodora. I did not want her combing my hair, and I would not comb it when she told me to. I did not smile at her when I woke up in a bad mood. I joined adult conversations, scowling when I disagreed. I said what was on my mind, and I did not care what anyone thought. I behaved, in other words, like a boy. When we moved a few miles north from the apartment in Union City to the house with the kitchen garden, Theodora came with us. My parents worked in textile factories, and so it was Thea who poured orange juice for us, who walked us across the street to school, Liliana in first grade and me in sixth grade. One morning, Theodora explained, "When you hear me call your name, you say, 'Señora?'" I told her, "That's ridiculous. Why should I say señora, the Spanish equivalent of ma'am, when someone came looking for me?" It made much more sense to reply, "What do you want?" Theodora glared at me. When she was angry, her long chin looked pointier, and she drew it in as if I had offended that part of her face. It was like watching a silent movie. Her chin pulled in, her forehead creased, her eyes slowly moved toward the green apples on the kitchen wallpaper. She had had enough of me. I was dismissed. Now, some years we had ridiculous arguments. Theodora wanted me to walk into the kitchen in the morning, see her at the table, and greet her with a kiss on the cheek and a buenos dias. Apparently, this was what all well-behaved teenagers did in Bogota. It was what my sister did in Jersey. I was the only one having a problem with good manners. "Buenos dias," Thea called to me from the kitchen table. I grunted and reached for the cereal box. She turned to my mother and declared in Spanish, "La India is in a bad mood." When a Colombian auntie calls you an Indian, it means you're behaving badly. Theodora gave me a long look, then pursed her lips and turned the conversation to monkeys. "Tiene el mico," she said, as if I were not in the room. This was her go-to phrase as well, the Colombian equivalent of saying you have a monkey on your back. It drove me crazy, the constant commentary on my moods and movements, even my facial expressions. One topic we never argued about, however, was the kissing bug disease. Theodora insisted on silence, and I agreed. She hid it from her new friends in Jersey, and when she received her teaching certification and landed a job teaching Spanish in an elementary school, she did not tell her coworkers. No matter how mad I was, I never snitched. It was her secret, and at the age of 13, I knew to not betray her. Besides, most days she was fine, flaca but fine. I thought of the disease as solid and inarguable, like the periodic table that hung in the science classroom at my high school. Who debates helium, nickel, or cobalt? I accepted without question that each element has its structure, its name, its place on the table and on the planet. I felt the same way about the kissing bug disease and also my auntie's body. It was a matter of fact. And we also never argued about the man who proposed to marry her. I'll stop there, but yeah, I feel like we have to talk about mothers because they're, part of the challenge of writing about my auntie was how complicated our relationship was. And the good parts of her I saw in your mother, actually, in your book, the sort of the emphasis on education.
Sure.
And for lack of a better word, like the striver immigrant, and that sort of like, wanting the best for us, and pushing, but it's hard to capture, a sort of larger than a life figure on the
Oh,
page.
definitely. I love what you read, and I love your auntie, and I have so many things to say, and I want to ask you, but I guess what is immediately coming to mind is, from hearing your incredible interview with Terry Gross on NPR, you had talked about how your auntie really loved teaching, and she was able to do that for a little while in New Jersey, right?
Mhm.
And how she did keep it as a secret. And it makes me think of a question about COVID, and about the pandemic, and how people maybe are in some ways have hidden that experience from others, if they had COVID or had family members with COVID. But just in general, like kind of on a macro level, I think you sold the book before the pandemic. I'm just curious how the
Yeah.
pandemic affected.
Yeah, no, in terms of our timeline, we were already in a editorial process when COVID happened, and then we had to make a decision. I had to make a decision about how to bring COVID into the book, and it was a little scary, actually, how easy it was to bring in COVID, because I do have a whole section of the book where I talk about racial disparities in healthcare, and so much of what I learned about this neglected disease just applies so much with even sort of, at the beginning, how easy it was for certain communities to get access to the vaccine, while people in like my mother's community were struggling because people there don't have cars and can't go to drive-through vaccination sites, for example. So it was pretty, it was, it was horrible and incredible at the same time that it was so easy to talk about this pandemic, because everything was true in terms of how we've treated not just this neglected disease, but so many others as well.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm just noticing the time, and I wanted to encourage people to submit questions. And we do have a question that kind of segues from this like pandemic and immigration. It's about Guatemala though, but it's something I struggled with as well in terms of writing about immigrant communities and this zoonotic disease. But it's a question from Mita. That many outsiders that focus on the Guatemalan Civil War conclude it's a dangerous and violent place. So how do you feel like you break up that kind of common narrative? Because I think every Latinx writer, especially in nonfiction, has to grapple with that question of we've got a dominant narrative about the places that our families come from.
Completely. And I think part of my project as a writer, I think, is to disrupt that single story of Guatemala. In many ways, both the Civil War, but also even currently, with the US-Mexico border. And so there's so much to say there, but I hope that in the book I provide like different angles or depictions of Guatemala, because the irony is that I didn't know about the Civil War. I mean, I knew about it vaguely, but when I went there and studied with Spanish teachers, ex-guerrilleros, I really learned about the war, but it wasn't in this way of like, here's information about the war. These were people with stories and interests and hobbies and things in their pockets. Of course, they were fully fleshed human beings. And so I think I hopefully captured that in the book, but also the war, the conditions of the war are what propelled my parents to leave, not because someone had a gun at their back, right? And it's horrible to be in that case. I'm not poking fun or anything, but the economic conditions are what really pushed them out and propelled them to seek jobs in the US. And my mom knew that was it. She was moving to the US and that was it. But my father was thinking, I'll just go for a couple years, make some money to buy a motorcycle, and then I'll come back to Guatemala. And I think just the fact that they're my own parents and my mother and father have these two hugely different perspectives on this one country, the size of Louisiana, right? says it all. Like there's no single story, even within a family, a nuclear family. My dad both of them are there now, actually, in Guatemala, and I was just with them there last week. So I think about that when I think about what stories I tell about Guatemala and what I kind of bring to the US. Like, I don't want to perpetuate stereotypes, but I also don't want to neglect so much of what is baked into the history, her stories, you know?
Yeah, and I was going to say too, I often teach your short essay that's in this collection, A Map of the World. And part of so I did not read it and come away with the impression of this is a dangerous, violent place. I really felt like I got to know some very specific people. And the Map of the World, I really love that because the setting is a library. And so I love like introducing my students to that story to remind them, like, you know, people have libraries in other countries. There's so many points of similarities of things that you think are only so specific to the United States that we have, you know, and I love that, like, the conversation that begins with the librarian there as well. And there's just these moments of insight, you know, even at the cafe that's begun for people who've been deported, actually, I think also creates this sense of people in Guatemala trying to rebuild. Yes. But it doesn't, I don't feel like you shy away from the fact that, like, you know, every civil war has its impact way after the truce has been called, right? And so you feel that impact of it. Yeah.
That's great. No, thank you for that question. I mean, how do you feel about that in your own work? Like, right, in this time of being labeled like a Colombian writer, a Colombian Cuban writer, a Latinx writer. I mean,
yeah, after the 2016, I was working on this when the 2016 presidential election happened, and I did think about not continuing with the book project at that point because I was really nervous about having people who have very strong anti-immigrant political beliefs and sentiments using this as you know, fodder or something, you know, for that kind of vitriol. I was really like, I had sort of like nightmare scenarios in my head of like people on the alt-right using my book in a disparaging way. And so I actually reached out to friends and to allies and really did a lot of thinking about whether to stop the project, because it is about disease and it is about immigrant communities. And I saw also a real change in how people I had been interviewing interacted with me, in terms of, you know, healthcare advocates. I feel like just everybody was so scared and no one wanted to talk anymore in the same way. There was sort of like an openness that really shut down in the wake of that election. But I decided to continue because it felt to me that if I stopped, I would be letting that philosophy win, and I would be letting that kind of hatred win the day, you know, and I would be letting it silence me and sort of silence what I had learned about the disease and the stories that families had shared with me. But I did make a decision to not name specific countries except for my own families, because there was sort of no way that I could get around that issue. But in terms of the stories of other patients, I made a decision to not name them. So I talk about whether they're from Central America or South America, for example. But I thought I don't want to give that kind of ammunition. I don't want people to like read my book and pull out a specific country. And even with Colombia is not a place that has high rates of this disease. So I felt like I was okay with naming that country because of that. But it is, it's a lot to juggle.
Yes,
for sure.
I know. And we've seen that, I guess, in our experiences, our careers. I mean, it's been really great to know you throughout different, like, through different books and different teaching positions. And, you know, just we've lived in different parts of the country. I mean, you read my older son, Mateo, you read him a book. I remember when he was like 10 months old. Baby. Yeah. And so I think it's great to be able to share this experience of becoming a writer, an author, and then sharing that with others who want to do the same thing. I mean, we had our mentors and, you know, our Sherry Moragas and Sandra Cisneros and Julia, you know, it's like, I think there's a t-shirt, right? It's like Sandra, Julia.
Yes.
Like, I need to get that. Okay. Yeah. And so, I mean, I'm
You know,
curious.
I just thought of a beautiful thing related to that is I took a class with Cristina Garcia, amazing novelist, and something that she said actually reminds me about your book, where she talked about how like the first page of every book is a promise to the reader of what's to come. And so the tone is set on that first page, you know, the themes, like everything, you know, like happens on the first page is this promise. And I was noticing that with your book as well, because you have that author's note where you talk about the suitcases being stolen and your family suitcases and photographs being stolen. And I thought, oh my gosh, what a beautiful, this is like such a promise to the reader of like, this whole book is those photographs that were lost essentially. It's such a beautiful, you know, it was just one of those moments where like, oh, something that I learned from a mentor is happening right here on page one
Nice.
of Jennifer's book. Yeah, it was
Oh, thank
fantastic.
you. Yeah. It's really it's so always a privilege to get to talk with you, and
Same here.
yeah, thank
And
you.
Paula's back, which means we're turning it over to her.
I tried to be subtle.
You were.
Oh, thank you both. I felt like at the beginning when I was doing the introductions that, oh my gosh, maybe I'm overselling. But man, the two of you definitely delivered. As I said, both your books, The Kissing Bug and White Space, are interesting and I think necessary when you're talking about these kinds of conversations around race and public health and memoir, and it's also necessary. And I think, I don't know honestly what was more interesting, you two talking about the content of your stories, your experiences, or the fact that you have such an obvious chemistry and friendship and, you know, just friendly rapport. It was great to watch the two of you interacting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
You, everybody buy The Kissing Bug.
yes, The Kissing Bag,
And
White,
the white space.
and definitely to let Book Passage viewers know, both of these books are available through Book Passage. You can come in person. We're open if you live in the Bay Area, obviously, or you're visiting the Bay Area. We're open from 10 o'clock to 5 o'clock, 7 days a week now. That's in person, it's safe, and you'll have some of the most knowledgeable booksellers, knowledgeable and passionate booksellers you'll ever find. And also we're like so many other independent bookstores available online now. You could call up. We're happy to put it in the mail and get it to you. But the important thing is that both these books are available through Book Passage, and we actually have signed editions. Signed meaning book plates, which is kind of the world we're living in now. And I think most of our customers and viewers realize that. So please avail yourselves. This is so interesting, both books. Sorry, I don't have my own copy. Daisy can put up White Space. I don't know. But they're the type of books where you're going to be marking it up. I did highlights, I did posted pads. So, and then you want to pass it on to friends and to family so they can experience. Very unique. Thank you so much. Thank you to our audience. These are events that we live for. Bye-bye.
Bye.